The Celtic chieftain Brennus stands before the gates of Rome in the summer of 390 BC, watching his Senones warriors loot the greatest city in Italy, while Roman senators cower on the Capitoline Hill like trapped rats. Behind him, the lower city burns, temples pillaged, houses ransacked, streets running with blood from citizens too slow to flee. For 7 months, he's besieged the last Roman holdouts on that sacred hill, and now they're starving, desperate, ready to surrender. The Roman envoys approach with trembling hands, carrying scales to weigh out 1,000 pounds of gold, Rome's entire treasury, as ransom for their pathetic survival. But when Romans complain the scales are rigged, Brennus unsheathes his heavy Celtic sword and throws it onto the weights, metal clanging against metal, as he snarls the words that will echo through history. Vae victis, woe to the conquered. The Romans, humiliated, must add more gold to balance the sword's weight, paying even more for their shame. This is the moment the mighty Senones, a Celtic tribe from the distant Seine and Yonne river valleys, proved that Rome, for all its growing power, could be brought to its knees by warriors who knew no fear. But to understand how these barbarian Gauls achieved what no Italian enemy had ever accomplished, capturing Rome itself, we must rewind 2 centuries to the misty forests and fertile river valleys of central France, where the Senones first emerged as masters of iron, gold, and war. Picture the 6th century BC, along the meandering Yonne River in what's now Burgundy. Celtic farmers and craftsmen established settlements that would become the foundation of one of Gaul's most powerful tribes. The land blessed them with everything: rich alluvial soil producing abundant grain harvests, rivers teeming with fish, forests providing timber and game, and most importantly, access to ancient trade routes connecting the Atlantic coast to the Mediterranean world. Archaeological excavations throughout the Yonne Valley have revealed extensive evidence of Senones' occupation dating to this formative period, but nothing compares to the spectacular discovery made near Châtillon-sur-Seine in 1953. Workers digging a cellar stumbled upon the Vix burial, an elite grave containing the remains of a high-status individual, possibly a princess or priestess, interred with extraordinary treasures that speak to the sophistication and wealth of early Senones society. The centerpiece, a massive bronze crater standing over 5 feet tall and weighing more than 450 pounds, the largest metal vessel ever discovered from the ancient world. This Greek-made masterpiece, transported over 1,000 miles from Mediterranean workshops to a Celtic grave in northern Gaul, demonstrates not only the wealth of Senones elites, but their extensive trade connections reaching civilizations the average Celt would never see. The crater's frieze depicts Greek warriors and chariots in exquisite detail, foreign gods and heroes adorning a vessel that would hold 300 gallons of wine for Celtic feasts honoring the dead. Alongside it, golden torques, neck rings, weighing pounds, bronze bowls from Etruscan Italy, coral ornaments from the Mediterranean, and amber beads from the distant Baltic. A treasure trove proving the Senones weren't isolated barbarians, but sophisticated traders connected to the ancient world's beating heart. The settlements themselves followed patterns typical of Celtic oppida, fortified hilltop positions, overlooking river crossings, and fertile agricultural lands. At Sens, ancient Agedincum, archaeological layers reveal continuous occupation from the 5th century BC onward. The site's strategic position at the confluence of the Yonne and Van rivers made it a natural center for trade and political control, a place where merchant boats could dock, warriors could muster, and druids could gather for sacred ceremonies under ancient oaks. Excavations have uncovered substantial timber and stone foundations, indicating permanent structures rather than temporary camps. These Celts built to last. Storage pits filled with carbonized grain suggest sophisticated agricultural practices with surplus production, while workshops containing metalworking debris point to specialized craft production that turned raw iron into weapons of devastating beauty. Senones society structured itself around kinship groups and territorial divisions, overseen by aristocratic elites, warrior nobles, who controlled land, livestock, and the loyalty of lesser tribesmen. At the apex stood chieftains, who demonstrated status through elaborate material displays. Weapons inlaid with coral and gold, jewelry proclaiming wealth, imported luxury goods showing connections to distant trading networks. The warrior ethos permeated everything. Young men proved themselves through raids against neighboring tribes, earning scars and glory, while the greatest warriors wore gold torques, marking them as champions who'd killed enemies in single combat. Below the warrior aristocracy, free farmers and craftsmen formed society's backbone. Individuals who owned land, participated in tribal assemblies, and could bear arms when war called. Craft specialization became increasingly important as Senones society grew complex. Metalworkers who could forge iron swords that held edges through entire battles. Potters, creating vessels both utilitarian and beautiful. Goldsmiths twisting wire into torques that proclaimed their wearer's status at a glance. The material culture places them firmly within Celtic civilization's Latin tradition. The transition from earlier Hallstatt culture, 8th to 5th centuries BC, to Latin, 450 BC onward, brought revolutionary changes in artistic expression. Flowing curvilinear designs, sophisticated metalwork, elaborate animal motifs that define Celtic art. Bronze torques, discovered in the region, display characteristic spiraling patterns that required specialized knowledge passed through generations. Iron production became increasingly sophisticated, with Senones smiths developing bloomer furnaces reaching temperatures sufficient to smelt ore, then working the resulting iron into long swords with pointed tips and double edges, weapons that became symbols of Celtic martial prowess and appear frequently in burials. Religious practices centered on the natural world and agricultural life's cyclical patterns. Sacred groves, springs, and hilltops served as focal points for ritual activity, with offerings deposited to ensure divine favor. The Seine and Yonne rivers yielded numerous Celtic artifacts, swords, shields, torques, coins, thrown into water as gifts to gods, whose names we've lost to time. The Druids played central roles as priests, judges, and repositories of tribal knowledge. These learned individuals underwent training lasting 20 years or more, memorizing vast amounts of oral tradition, including laws, genealogies, and religious lore. They conducted sacrifices, interpreted omens, and served as intermediaries between human and divine worlds. Their authority, sometimes exceeding even chieftains' power. Major festivals marked key agricultural points. Samhain, at October's end, celebrated winter's beginning, when the boundary between living and dead became permeable, while Beltane, in early May, celebrated life and fertility returning to the land. These gatherings brought scattered communities together for ceremonies, trade, and political discussions, reinforcing tribal unity. But by 400 BC, mounting pressures threatened this prosperous Celtic world. The Yonne Valley's success created its own problems. Growing populations strained agricultural resources, while increased settlement density sparked conflicts over land and trade routes. Archaeological evidence reveals signs of this strain. Fortifications increased, defensive earthworks multiplied, and mass grave sites dating to approximately 400 BC indicate violent conflicts resulting from territorial disputes. Climate data, reconstructed from pollen analysis, suggests the late 5th and early 4th centuries BC experienced cooler temperatures and reduced agricultural yields across northern Europe. The Hallstatt oscillation that created additional stress on Celtic communities relying heavily on grain production. The Senones, despite sophisticated techniques and extensive trade, faced the same environmental challenges affecting Celtic peoples throughout Gaul. Simultaneously, Germanic tribes pushing westward across the Rhine created a domino effect, displacing Celtic populations. The Cimbri and Teutones, Germanic peoples documented by later Roman sources, initiated migrations that forced Celtic tribes to seek new territories or face absorption into expanding Germanic confederations. Archaeological layers show evidence of site abandonments and population movements, traditional settlement patterns disrupted across wide areas. Meanwhile, stories of Italy beyond the Alps circulated through Celtic trade networks and warrior bands, tales of fertile valleys, mild climates, and wealthy cities that made northern Gaul's increasingly crowded lands seem poor by comparison. Greek colonies in southern Italy had established prosperous settlements, attracting Celtic mercenaries, who returned with accounts of agricultural abundance and urban wealth exceeding anything available in Gaul. These reports, combined with knowledge gained through existing trade relationships, painted Italy as a land of opportunity for ambitious Celtic peoples willing to risk everything for a fresh start. Political fragmentation within Senones society contributed to the migration decision. The tribe's decentralized structure, while effective for managing scattered settlements, created competing power centers, pursuing conflicting interests. Archaeological evidence suggests certain Senones settlements maintained stronger Mediterranean connections, while others focused on traditional northern relationships, a division that may have led to factional disputes, encouraging some groups to seek independence through migration rather than submit to rival authorities. Around 390 BC, the decision was made. A substantial portion of the Senones would cross the Alps and seek their fortunes in Italy. This wasn't a desperate flight of refugees, but a calculated gamble by ambitious warriors and their families seeking land, wealth, and glory in territories held by peoples the Celts considered soft and ripe for conquest. The Alpine crossing represented a monumental undertaking, requiring careful planning and considerable resources. The migration followed established routes through mountain passes used by traders for centuries. The Great Street, Bernard Pass, Poenus Mons, to ancient peoples, provided the most direct route from Gallic territories to the Po Valley. Archaeological evidence from the pass includes Celtic artifacts and coin hoards, likely representing offerings made by travelers seeking divine protection during their dangerous journey, moving entire communities, women, children, elderly, livestock, household goods, across treacherous mountain terrain demanded sophisticated organizational capabilities. Senones leaders coordinated food supplies, established temporary camps, and maintained group cohesion during weeks of difficult travel. Evidence suggests Celtic migrants followed seasonal movement strategies, timing their crossing to avoid worst winter weather while ensuring adequate pasturage for animals along the route. The descent into the Po Valley brought Senones into contact with established Etruscan settlements and emerging Roman influence. Initial encounters appear relatively peaceful, with Celtic groups possibly serving as mercenaries before establishing permanent settlements. The rich agricultural lands with their fertile alluvial soils and favorable climate must have seemed like paradise compared to increasingly crowded Gaul. The Senones established primary Italian settlements along the Adriatic coast in the region Romans would later term Ager Gallicus, Gallic territory. This area, roughly corresponding to modern Marche and parts of Romagna, provided excellent access to maritime trade routes and the rich agricultural hinterland of Apennine foothills. Archaeological excavations at sites like Senigallia and Fano reveal substantial Celtic settlements dating to late 4th century BC, with material culture demonstrating continuity with Gallic traditions while showing adaptation to Italian conditions. The coastal location reflected sophisticated strategic thinking, control of Adriatic ports, provided access to Greek trade networks extending throughout the eastern Mediterranean, while proximity to river mouths allowed penetration into the Italian interior. The Metoro, Cesano, and other rivers flowing from Apennines to Adriatic served as natural highways for trade and communication. Interaction with existing Italian populations proved complex and often violent. The Picentes, an Italic people controlling much of the central Adriatic coast for centuries, found themselves displaced or subordinated by arriving Senones. Archaeological evidence suggests periods of coexistence in some areas, with mixed Celtic piscine sites showing cultural blending, but other locations reveal clear conflict evidence, burned settlement layers and weapon deposits indicating violent confrontations. The Umbrians, controlling territories west and south of initial Senones settlements, represented another significant challenge. These Italic peoples had developed sophisticated urban centers and military organizations, proving more resistant to Celtic pressure. Archaeological evidence from Umbrian sites shows increased fortification and adoption of Celtic military technologies during this period, suggesting an arms race as they competed for territorial control. Senones' military tactics in Italy reflected adaptations to local conditions. Traditional Celtic emphasis on individual warrior prowess and fierce charges remained important, but encounters with disciplined Italian infantry required modifications. Archaeological finds include Celtic weapons modified with Italian features, longer spear points, reinforced shield construction, suggesting learning from local military traditions while maintaining core Celtic fighting methods that had made them feared throughout Europe. The establishment of alliances with other Gallic tribes in northern Italy became crucial to Senones' success. The Boii, who'd settled in the western Po Valley around the same time, shared similar cultural backgrounds and faced comparable challenges. Archaeological evidence suggests extensive interaction, similar pottery styles, metalwork traditions, settlement patterns indicating close cooperation and possible intermarriage. The Lingones, another Celtic tribe participating in Italian migrations, established themselves in territories adjacent to both Boii and Senones, creating geographic proximity, facilitating a loose confederation. This alliance of Gallic peoples could coordinate activities against common enemies while maintaining distinct tribal identities. Shared religious practices, evidenced by similar votive deposits and sanctuary sites, helped cement these alliances. Trade relationships between allied Gallic tribes created economic networks, strengthening their collective position. Senones' control of Adriatic ports complemented Boii agricultural production and Lingones' mineral resources, creating mutually beneficial exchange systems. Archaeological evidence shows increased standardization of weights, measures, and coinage across Gallic territories in Italy, suggesting formal economic cooperation beyond simple barter. But it was military success that truly announced Gallic arrival as a force reshaping Italian politics. By the late 392 BC, the Senones and their allies had established themselves firmly along the Adriatic, while extending influence deeper into the Italian peninsula. Then came an opportunity too tempting to resist. The Etruscan city-state of Clusium, facing pressure from expanding Roman power, sought Gallic military assistance against their aggressive neighbors to the south. Clusium, modern Chiusi, located in Tuscany, controlled crucial trade routes between the Tyrrhenian coast and interior valleys. The Romans, having recently expelled their last king and established republican government, pursued aggressive expansion, bringing them into conflict with established Etruscan powers. Roman capture of Veii in 396 BC after a decade-long siege, eliminating a major Etruscan stronghold just 12 miles from Rome, demonstrated growing Roman military capabilities and sent shockwaves through the Etruscan world. Faced with this Roman pressure, Clusium's aristocracy made the fateful decision to hire Gallic warriors, Etruscan emissaries carrying substantial payments of gold and silver traveled to Senones settlements to negotiate military cooperation. The Senones' response reflected both opportunism and strategic calculation. Their expansion southward had already brought them into contact with Roman allies, creating natural friction. The prospect of Etruscan payments combined with opportunities for plunder and territorial gain made intervention attractive. Brennus, the Senones chieftain who would lead the campaign, emerges from historical records as a figure of considerable military and political acumen. His name, derived from Celtic Brennanos, meaning king or leader, suggests he held supreme authority among Senones warriors. Classical sources describe him as a man of imposing physical presence, though these accounts must be viewed cautiously given Roman authorship and tendency to exaggerate enemy characteristics. The Senones force that marched toward Clusium in 390 BC represented a significant military undertaking, drawing warriors from multiple settlements. The army included not only Senones warriors, but contingents from allied Gallic tribes, creating a formidable force, possibly numbering tens of thousands, the largest Gallic military operation Italy had yet witnessed. Celtic military equipment reflected centuries of evolution. The Lawtan longsword, measuring 60 to 80 centimeters in length, provided devastating slashing weapons ideally suited to Gallic fighting style. These swords, forged from high-quality iron using sophisticated pattern welding techniques, could cleave through bronze armor and inflict terrible wounds. Archaeological examples show exceptional craftsmanship, with complex geometric patterns created by folding and welding different iron grades. Spears formed the primary weapon for most warriors, iron-tipped ash shafts 2 to 3 meters long, serving multiple functions, allowing engagement at distance before closing for hand-to-hand combat. Broad-bladed spears designed for thrusting featured reinforced sockets, preventing heads from breaking during combat, while lighter javelins incorporated barbed points, making them difficult to remove from shields or flesh. Celtic shields, while rarely preserved due to organic construction, can be reconstructed from metal fittings and classical descriptions. These large oval or rectangular shields, approximately 1 meter in height and constructed from wooden planks covered with leather, provided substantial protection. Bronze or iron shield bosses, often decorated with intricate Celtic motifs, reinforced centers while providing offensive weapons for close combat. The characteristic Celtic shield grip positioned behind the boss allowed warriors to punch with shields while maintaining defensive coverage. The march toward Clusium brought Brennus's army through territories, witnessing centuries of conflict between Italian peoples. The route likely followed established roads and river valleys, providing water and supplies while avoiding difficult terrain. Classical sources suggest the Gallic army moved with considerable speed, covering the distance in weeks. Rapid advance, preventing effective enemy coordination while maintaining surprise that formed crucial components of Celtic military doctrine. Initial encounters between Senones' forces and Clusium's enemies demonstrated Celtic tactics' effectiveness against traditional Italian warfare. Gallic warriors fighting with fierce enthusiasm, characteristic of their martial culture, overwhelmed organized resistance through sheer ferocity of attacks. The psychological impact of Celtic war cries, combined with imposing physical appearance and unfamiliar fighting techniques, proved devastating against opponents accustomed to more conventional warfare. However, the situation became complicated by Roman diplomatic envoys' arrival, representatives dispatched to mediate the conflict. These Roman emissaries, members of the prestigious Fabii family, possessed significant political authority and were tasked with preventing further Gallic expansion, threatening Roman interests. The Fabii attempted negotiating peaceful resolution, satisfying Senones' demands while preserving Etruscan independence and Roman strategic objectives. The breakdown occurred when Roman envoys, through miscalculation or deliberate provocation, participated in combat operations against Senones forces. Classical sources describe incidents where Roman representatives took up arms alongside Etruscan defenders, violating neutrality their diplomatic status should have guaranteed. This breach of diplomatic protocol provided Brennus both legal justification and political motivation for extending his campaign beyond original objectives to include direct Roman confrontation. The Senones' demand for surrender of the Fabii, who'd violated diplomatic immunity, reflected Celtic legal traditions, placing enormous emphasis on diplomatic agreements' sanctity and punishment of violators. Roman refusal to surrender the offending envoys, combined with their decision to honor the Fabii with magistracies upon return to Rome, demonstrated fundamental disrespect for Celtic legal principles that couldn't be ignored without loss of face, the worst fate imaginable for a Celtic chieftain whose authority rested on personal honor and martial reputation. What had begun as limited military intervention transformed into direct challenge to Roman power, a transformation reflecting complex dynamics of Celtic warrior society. Individual warriors who joined Brennus, hoping for wealth and glory through successful campaigning, now found themselves committed to much larger conflict, offering both greater risks and potentially greater rewards. The prospect of sacking Rome itself, with its accumulated wealth and prestigious temples, must have seemed irresistible to warriors whose culture celebrated martial achievement above all other success. The march southward from Clusium toward Rome brought Senones' army through territories under Roman control for generations. The speed of advance prevented effective mobilization of Roman allies and client states, while Celtic military prowess reputation encouraged many communities to avoid confrontation rather than risk destruction. Archaeological evidence shows signs of hasty abandonment at several sites along the likely advance route, suggesting civilian populations fled rather than face the approaching Gallic army. The Roman response reflected both urgency and limitations of early Republican military organization. The Roman army relied heavily on citizen soldiers, requiring time to assemble, organize, and march to threatened areas. Celtic advance speed compressed this timeline dramatically, forcing Roman commanders to deploy available forces without adequate preparation or ally coordination. The Roman force marching north to confront Brennus represented substantial portions of the city's military strength, regular legions and hastily recruited auxiliaries, perhaps 15,000 men total. Roman military equipment still showed significant Etruscan influence. Bronze armor, Greek-style hoplite tactics, forming their tactical system's backbone. Roman soldiers carried large round shields, bronze breastplates, and short-thrusting spears designed for close formation fighting rather than individual combat preferred by Celtic warriors. On July 18, 390 BC, the two armies met at the Allia River, a small tributary of the Tiber, located approximately 11 miles north of Rome. Brennus positioned his forces along the riverbanks, terrain offering tactical advantages, including elevated positions, forcing Romans to attack uphill while providing Gauls clear fields of fire for missile weapons. The river itself, while not a major obstacle, channeled Roman approach and prevented full deployment of their superior numbers in initial battle stages. The Celtic battle line extended across the valley floor, with the river protecting one flank and rising ground securing the other. Brennus placed his most experienced warriors in the center, where they could anchor the entire formation while demonstrating prowess to younger fighters positioned on flanks. The chieftain himself took position with elite warriors in the front rank, following Celtic tradition, requiring leaders to share dangers faced by followers. Roman tactical deployment reflected confidence in traditional formation fighting and underestimation of Celtic capabilities. Roman commanders positioned heavy infantry in the center, with lighter troops and allied contingents extending the line toward both flanks. Conventional approach, effective against similarly organized opponents. but failing to account for mobility and individual fighting skills characterizing Celtic warfare. When contact came, the result was catastrophic for Rome. Within moments, Senones warriors screaming traditional war cries and brandishing longswords charged down the slope toward Roman formation with ferocity that stunned opponents. The psychological impact, combined with unfamiliar sight of half-naked warriors decorated with war paint and torques, proved devastating to Roman morale even before physical combat commenced. Celtic fighting techniques developed through centuries of intertribal warfare proved devastatingly effective against Roman formation tactics. Senones warriors used superior reach and mobility to break through Roman shield walls, employing long swords to strike over and around smaller Roman shields. Celtic emphasis on individual prowess allowed experienced warriors to exploit gaps in Roman lines, creating opportunities for comrades to pour through and attack Romans from multiple directions simultaneously. The collapse occurred with shocking rapidity, transforming what should have been hard-fought battle into complete rout within hours. Roman soldiers trained to fight in close formation with mutual support found themselves isolated and vulnerable once tactical cohesion broke down. The speed and violence of Celtic assault prevented effective rallying or organized retreat, leaving individual Romans to flee toward their city. Thousands died in the massacre, bodies piled along the riverbank, blood turning the Ilia's waters red. Roman equipment scattered across the battlefield as survivors fled in panic. Some Romans who reached the Tiber attempted swimming to safety, drowning in armor too heavy to swim in. Others ran cross-country toward Rome, carrying news of the catastrophe. The road to Rome lay open. Brennus had shattered Roman military power in a single afternoon, proving that the republic everyone feared was vulnerable to warriors who knew no fear. But what came next would prove even more shocking. The 3-day delay between Alia and the actual assault on Rome reflected careful deliberation rather than hesitation. Celtic military tradition emphasized proper ritual preparation before major undertakings. The prospect of attacking one of Italy's most significant urban centers required extensive consultation with druids who accompanied the army. During this crucial interval, Roman defenders frantically prepared the city's defenses while debating whether to negotiate or resist. Ancient sources describe chaotic scenes, civilians fleeing to countryside, valuables buried or hidden, remaining military forces taking defensive positions on Capitoline Hill. The decision to abandon the lower city while concentrating resistance on the Capitoline reflected both practical limitations and calculated gamble that Gallic forces would eventually withdraw if denied easy plunder and decisive victory. When Brennus's assault finally came, it demonstrated both strengths and limitations of Celtic urban warfare capabilities. Gallic warriors accustomed to fighting in open terrain found themselves confronting defensive challenges differing significantly from previous military experience. Roman urban architecture, with narrow streets, multi-story buildings, and complex defensive positions, required tactical adaptations, testing Celtic military organization flexibility. The initial penetration of Rome's outer defenses occurred through combination of Celtic audacity and Roman defensive failures. Senones warriors scaled city walls using improvised ladders and grappling hooks, while others forced through gates inadequately secured or abandoned by fleeing defenders. The speed of Celtic advance through Lower City reflected experience in rapid assault tactics, but also revealed limited Roman resistance once their primary field army had been destroyed at Alia. The Lower City fell quickly, Gallic warriors pouring through streets, looting houses, desecrating temples, killing anyone too slow or stubborn to flee. The destruction was systematic. Temples stripped of gold and silver, patrician houses ransacked for valuables, public buildings burned. But the Capitoline Hill, that sacred height where Rome's most important temples stood, remained defiant. A small Roman garrison, perhaps 1,000 men including senators, magistrates, and the city's remaining soldiers, held the summit, protected by steep approaches and hastily improved fortifications. Thus began the 7-month siege that would become one of ancient history's most famous standoffs. Brennus and his Senones warriors, having achieved immediate military objectives, found themselves committed to static siege operations, contradicting traditional preferences for mobile warfare and rapid conflict resolution. Maintaining blockade around Capitoline, while securing supply lines and defending against potential relief efforts, required organizational skills stretching Celtic capabilities to limits. Roman resistance demonstrated remarkable tenacity despite desperate circumstances. The hill's natural defensive advantages, steep approaches, limited access routes, allowed relatively small garrison to hold out against vastly superior numbers. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of extensive defensive preparations, reinforced walls, storage facilities, water systems, enabling prolonged resistance. The presence of Rome's most sacred temples added religious motivation to practical defense necessities, creating psychological frameworks sustaining Roman morale. The siege settled into grinding stalemate. Brennus's forces controlled everything below the Capitoline, living in captured Roman houses, eating stored Roman grain, but unable to dislodge the last defenders without unacceptable casualties. The Romans, trapped on their sacred hill, slowly starved while watching their city occupied by barbarians who sacrificed to strange gods and spoke incomprehensible languages. Imagine the psychological torture. Roman senators reduced to eating rats and leather, looking down at Gallic warriors feasting in their abandoned homes, wearing their looted clothes, drinking their wine. Classical sources preserve legends from the siege. The sacred geese of Juno, whose honking warned of a nighttime Gallic assault attempt, allowing Romans to repel attackers climbing the cliff face in darkness. Whether true or later invention, such stories reflect Roman determination to find heroism in humiliation. As months dragged on, both sides faced mounting pressures. The Senones, while well supplied from captured Roman stores, received troubling reports from their new Adriatic territories, rival tribes threatening their settlements, allies demanding assistance. Prolonged absence from their newly conquered lands risked losing everything they'd gained. The Romans faced simpler but more immediate problems: starvation, disease, despair. Finally, negotiations began. Roman envoys, their dignity in tatters, descended from the Capitoline to discuss terms. Brennus demanded 1,000 pounds of gold, Rome's entire treasury, as ransom for withdrawing his forces and allowing the city to survive. The Romans, broken and desperate, agreed. On the appointed day, Roman officials brought scales to weigh out the gold in Rome's forum, surrounded by Gallic warriors who'd conquered the unconquerable city. But when Romans complained the scales were rigged, weights too heavy, forcing them to pay more than agreed, Brennus responded with the gesture that would define his legend. He unbuckled his heavy Celtic sword, iron blade that had killed Romans at Allia, and threw it onto the scales alongside the weights. The additional weight meant Romans would have to provide even more gold to balance the scales. When Roman negotiators protested this violation of their agreement, Brennus snarled 3 words that echoed through history: Vae victis. Woe to the conquered. The strong do what they will. The weak suffer what they must. Rome paid the additional gold, their humiliation complete. With captured treasure beyond imagination, 1,000 pounds of gold, plus the sword's weight, along with months of systematic looting, Brennus led his warriors north in triumph. They'd achieved what no enemy had accomplished, capturing Rome, humiliating the Republic, proving that Roman power was an illusion that Celtic courage could shatter. The withdrawal wasn't flight, but calculated decision. Brennus had bled Rome white, taken its wealth, destroyed its army, and demonstrated its vulnerability. Why stay longer when new territories along the Adriatic awaited development? The sack of Rome transformed Senones from successful migrants into legendary conquerors. The wealth gained from Roman ransom, combined with plunder accumulated during Italian campaigns, provided resources necessary for systematic development of Adriatic territories. Archaeological evidence from Senones sites, dating to the period immediately following 390 BC, shows dramatic increases in construction activity, craft production, and trade relationships, reflecting enhanced status and financial capabilities. The establishment of Sena Gallica as primary urban center and tribal capital represented fundamental shift in Senones settlement patterns. Located near the Misa River mouth on the Adriatic coast, the site offered exceptional advantages for maritime commerce and territorial administration. Natural harbor provided secure anchorage for trading vessels, while River Valley offered access to rich agricultural hinterland. Archaeological excavations at Sena Gallia, modern successor to Sena Gallica, reveal extensive Celtic settlement layers, demonstrating sophisticated urban planning and substantial infrastructure investment. The urban layout reflected synthesis of Celtic architectural traditions and Mediterranean urban planning concepts encountered through interactions with Greek colonies and Etruscan cities. The settlement featured central area containing public buildings, religious structures, and elite residences arranged around open spaces serving as markets and assembly areas. This core was surrounded by residential districts organized along grid patterns, facilitating efficient movement and administration while providing adequate space for craft workshops and storage facilities. Construction techniques demonstrated remarkable adaptation to local conditions. Celtic builders, traditionally working with timber and earth, incorporated stone masonry and tile roofing better suited to Mediterranean climate. Use of local limestone and clay allowed durable construction while reducing transportation costs. Archaeological analysis of building foundations reveals sophisticated engineering, including drainage systems, foundation reinforcement, and fire-resistant construction, reflecting learning from both Celtic traditions and Italian innovations. The fortification system combined Celtic defensive concepts with tactical lessons from Italian campaigns. Main defensive wall constructed using Murus Gallicus technique, timber frame with stone facing and internal bracing, provided exceptional strength against assault and siege equipment. Archaeological excavations reveal multiple construction phases, suggesting continuous improvement as settlement grew. Harbor facilities represented one of the most sophisticated engineering projects undertaken by Senones during the Italian period. Construction of stone quays, warehouses, and shipbuilding facilities required substantial investment and technical expertise, demonstrating tribal commitment to maritime commerce. Archaeological evidence includes stone anchors, ship fittings, warehouse foundations, indicating extensive trading activity with Greek colonies in southern Italy, Sicily, and eastern Mediterranean. Agricultural development of territory surrounding Sena Gallica reflected systematic efforts to maximize productive potential. Fertile alluvial soils of coastal plains proved ideally suited to Mediterranean crops, including wheat, barley, olives, and grapes, providing both subsistence and trade commodities. Archaeological survey has identified numerous rural settlements and farmsteads, demonstrating planned agricultural colonization, using techniques combining Celtic farming traditions with locally adapted methods. The introduction of olive cultivation represented particularly significant innovation, requiring substantial initial investment and long-term planning. Olive trees require several years to reach maturity. The Senones' commitment to olive cultivation demonstrated intention to remain permanently in Italy while adapting agricultural practices to Mediterranean conditions. Archaeological evidence includes olive pressing facilities and storage jars, indicating substantial production for both consumption and export trade. Viticulture development followed similar patterns, with Senones adapting traditional brewing techniques to wine production while learning Mediterranean practices from neighboring peoples. Hills surrounding Sena Gallica provided ideal grape cultivation conditions with well-drained soils and favorable microclimates, producing high-quality wines. The strategic position on the Adriatic coast provided access to established Greek trading routes, while river valley control allowed penetration into Italian interior. Trade networks connected Sena Gallica to markets throughout the Mediterranean, from Black Sea colonies to western settlements of Massalia and beyond. Development of standardized weights, measures, and coinage facilitated these relationships while demonstrating sophisticated commercial understanding. Senones coins from this period show clear Greek influence in design and metallurgy while incorporating Celtic artistic motifs, proclaiming tribal identity. But this prosperity attracted Roman attention. The Republic, recovering from 390 BC humiliation, undertook comprehensive military reforms, transforming their legionary system into more flexible fighting force. The Romans had learned harsh lessons from Alia. They would never again underestimate Celtic warriors or rely solely on rigid phalanx formations vulnerable to Celtic assault tactics. The manipular legion that emerged from these reforms abandoned rigid formations, replacing them with smaller tactical units called maniples that could adapt to varied terrain and enemy fighting styles while maintaining battlefield coordination. Roman military equipment underwent equally significant modifications, designed specifically to counter Celtic advantages. The traditional large round shield gave way to the scutum, rectangular shield measuring approximately 4 feet in height, constructed from laminated wood strips covered with canvas and leather. This new design provided better protection against downward slashing attacks favored by Celtic longswords, while curved shape deflected blows more effectively than flat surfaces. Most significantly, Romans adopted the gladius, a short thrusting sword measuring approximately 2 feet in length, possibly derived from Spanish designs. This weapon proved devastatingly effective against Celtic fighting techniques, emphasizing slashing attacks with longer weapons. The gladius excelled in close-quarters combat that characterized manipular tactics, allowing Roman soldiers to deliver fatal thrusting attacks, while opponents struggled to employ longer swords effectively in confined spaces. Roman tactical doctrine evolved to exploit these equipment advantages through coordinated small unit operations, negating traditional Celtic strengths in individual combat and psychological warfare. Maniples operated as semi-independent tactical units capable of mutual support while maintaining flexibility to respond to local battlefield conditions. The Senones, observing Roman innovations through intelligence gathered during border skirmishes, undertook their own military adaptations. Celtic smiths began producing shorter, more maneuverable weapons suitable for closer combat, while maintaining superior metallurgical techniques, giving their blades advantages in sharpness and durability. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits reveals experimentation with different sword lengths, blade profiles, and hilt designs, suggesting systematic efforts to optimize Celtic weapons for changing conditions. Shield construction incorporated lessons learned from encounters with Roman missile weapons, particularly the pilum, heavy javelin designed to penetrate armor and disable enemy shields. Celtic armorers developed reinforced shield construction using metal strips and thicker leather covering that could better resist Roman attacks while maintaining mobility advantages. The development of Senones' cavalry capabilities represented perhaps their most significant military innovation. Traditional Celtic warfare had emphasized infantry combat, with limited mounted warrior use, except for reconnaissance and pursuit. However, Italian terrain's open nature and need to counter Roman tactical mobility encouraged greater cavalry investment, exploiting mounted combat's speed and shock value. By the 352nd BC, Romano-Senones relations had settled into a pattern of constant, low-level conflict, punctuated by occasional major campaigns. Roman forces, employing reform tactics, initially achieved success against various Italian enemies, but found themselves facing unexpected challenges when Senones reinforcements arrived. The siege of Sutrium in 386 BC marked significant escalation. Senones forces operating in alliance with Etruscan cities threatened by Roman expansion attempted capturing this crucial Roman stronghold, controlling access to Etruscan territories. Celtic siege tactics demonstrated adaptation of traditional assault methods to fortified positions challenges, with engineers constructing siege mounds and assault ramps while maintaining aggressive, direct assault tactics. The Roman relief of Sutrium provided first major test of reformed capabilities against evolved Senones tactical systems. The resulting battle demonstrated Roman military reform's effectiveness, while revealing areas requiring further adaptation. Roman maniples, operating with improved coordination, proved more resilient against Celtic assault tactics, while Senones forces demonstrated their own evolution through improved coordination between infantry and cavalry units, more sophisticated terrain use, and better integration of allied Etruscan forces. The inconclusive nature reflected broader strategic stalemate. Neither side possessed decisive advantages sufficient to achieve complete victory, while both had developed capabilities preventing catastrophic defeat. This tactical balance encouraged more sophisticated strategic approaches, emphasizing economic warfare, diplomatic maneuvering, and territorial control, rather than simple battlefield confrontation. Senones, raiding operations throughout the 382nd and 372nd BC, represented systematic campaigns designed to weaken Roman economic capabilities while avoiding decisive battles favoring Roman advantages. These raids, typically involving relatively small mounted warrior forces supported by local allies, targeted Roman agricultural areas, trade routes, and isolated settlements that couldn't be effectively defended by concentrated forces. The economic damage, while individually limited, accumulated over time, creating significant strain on Roman resources and civilian morale. The targeting of Roman colonies represented particularly effective aspects of Senones' raiding strategy. These settlements served both as Roman expansion symbols and practical bases for territorial control. Attacks on colonies demonstrated Celtic capabilities for coordinated operations against fortified positions, while sending clear messages about Roman territorial ambitions' costs. Roman counter-raiding operations attempted imposing similar economic costs on Senones territories while demonstrating military capabilities to potential allies and enemies. These campaigns typically conducted during agricultural seasons, when Celtic warriors might be occupied with farming targeted Senones, coastal settlements, trade facilities, and agricultural areas, supporting military capabilities. Limited success reflected both defensive advantages of Senones' coastal positions and tactical challenges faced by Roman forces operating in unfamiliar territory against opponents retaining significant mobility advantages. The development of fortified road networks represented Roman innovation designed to project power into contested territories while providing secure communications between bases and allied settlements. These roads, protected by regularly spaced fortifications and patrolled by mobile forces, allowed Roman armies to move rapidly between threatened areas while maintaining supply lines essential for sustained operations. Construction required substantial resource and manpower investment but provided long-term strategic advantages, gradually shifting territorial control balance in Rome's favor. Senones' responses included systematic attacks on construction sites, ambushes of engineering units, and attempts destroying completed sections through coordinated raiding. These defensive measures, while individually successful in delaying construction, ultimately proved insufficient, preventing gradual Roman infrastructure extension into territories previously considered secure Celtic domains. By the 292nd BC, accumulated Roman advantages in infrastructure, military organization, and diplomatic alliances reached critical mass. The strategic stalemate characterizing previous decades began shifting decisively in Rome's favor. Systematic fortified road construction, military colony establishment, and cultivation of anti-Celtic sentiment among Italic peoples created increasingly constrictive environment around Senones territories, limiting strategic options while enhancing Roman capabilities for sustained operations. The Roman conquest of Samnium between 343 and 290 BC provided crucial strategic advantages directly impacting Adriatic coast power balance. Roman control of central Apennine passes eliminated traditional Senones escape routes toward Gallic homeland while providing bases for operations against Celtic territories. Veteran legions, emerging from decades of Samnite warfare, possessed unparalleled experience in mountain combat, siege operations, and sustained campaigning, making them formidable opponents. Archaeological evidence from former Samnite strongholds reveals extensive Roman fortification efforts designed creating permanent bases for further expansion rather than temporary occupation forces. The establishment of Roman naval capabilities in the Adriatic fundamentally altered strategic equation for Senones coastal settlements, previously relying on maritime escape routes and supply lines. Roman naval base construction at Brundisium and Ancona provided platforms for systematic interdiction of Celtic maritime communications while threatening direct assault on previously secure coastal positions. The Roman fleet, while initially modest, possessed sufficient strength to challenge Celtic control of Adriatic trade routes, forming economic foundations of Senones' power in Italy. Senones' diplomatic efforts to secure external support against mounting Roman pressure achieved limited success as potential allies faced their own Roman military pressure or calculated that accommodation offered better prospects than continued resistance. The Boii, traditional allies controlling western Po Valley territories, found themselves increasingly isolated by Roman diplomatic initiatives, detaching individual Celtic settlements through favorable submission offers. Archaeological evidence from Boii sites shows signs of internal conflict and population movement, suggesting political fragmentation under Roman pressure. The failure of broader Gallic intervention on behalf of Italian kinsmen reflected both practical difficulties organizing large-scale military operations across Alps and growing Roman defensive preparations along traditional invasion routes. Transalpine Celtic peoples, while maintaining cultural and family connections with Italian Gauls, faced their own territorial pressures from Germanic expansion and internal political conflicts, limiting ability to provide meaningful military assistance. The few Gallic reinforcements reaching Italy proved insufficient, altering fundamental strategic balance, while often arriving too late for effective participation in critical operations. Roman psychological warfare systematically undermined Senones' morale and political cohesion through targeted propaganda, emphasizing continued resistance, futility, while offering attractive terms for individual defection. Roman agents, operating through established trade networks and diplomatic contacts, spread accounts of Celtic defeats in other theaters, while highlighting Roman clemency toward former enemies who submitted voluntarily. These operations, combined with visible Roman military preparations and gradual isolation of Senones' territories, created internal pressures weakening Celtic resolve and encouraging factional disputes within tribal leadership. Economic warfare accompanying military pressure proved equally devastating. Roman control of trade routes and systematic targeting of commercial infrastructure gradually strangled economic foundations of Celtic power. Roman interdiction of maritime commerce eliminated crucial revenue sources, while attacks on agricultural areas reduced food supplies necessary to sustain large military forces. Cumulative effects forced difficult choices between maintaining military capabilities and preserving civilian populations. ultimately weakening both defensive preparations and popular support for continued resistance. The political crisis erupting within Senones' leadership during early 282 BC reflected these accumulated pressures as different factions advocated competing strategies for dealing with Roman threats. Archaeological evidence from Sena Gallica reveals signs of hasty construction and defensive preparations, suggesting urgent military concerns, while coin hoards buried throughout Senones' territories indicate widespread civilian anxiety about future security. Discovery of weapons caches hidden in rural settlements demonstrates systematic preparation for guerrilla warfare, suggesting recognition of conventional military defeat likelihood. In 283 BC, Rome decided the moment had arrived for final resolution of the Celtic threat. Consul Publius Cornelius Dolabella, appointed to command the decisive expedition, possessed extensive Celtic warfare experience from previous campaigns. His selection demonstrated Roman confidence in military capabilities, while acknowledging the serious challenge posed by Senones' resistance. Dolabella's strategic planning emphasized coordination between multiple Roman forces operating from different directions to prevent Senones' concentration of defensive efforts while eliminating potential escape routes. Roman forces advancing from south along coastal route would coordinate with mountain columns descending from Apennine passes to create systematic compression, forcing decisive engagement under conditions favorable to Roman tactical advantages. The Roman army assembled for the final campaign represented the culmination of military reforms and tactical innovations developed through generations of Italian warfare. The legions marching north under Dolabella's command included veteran units with extensive Celtic combat experience, supplemented by allied contingents from recently conquered territories possessing intimate knowledge of local terrain and Celtic fighting methods. Archaeological analysis of Roman military equipment from this period reveals standardized production techniques and improved metallurgy, giving Roman soldiers significant weapons quality and protective equipment advantages. The siege train accompanying forces included sophisticated engineering equipment specifically designed for operations against Celtic fortifications. Roman engineers had studied Celtic defensive techniques through decades of siege operations, developing specialized equipment and tactics for breaching timber-framed walls characterizing Gallic fortifications. Presence of artillery engines, siege towers, and mining equipment demonstrated Roman commitment to achieving decisive results rather than accepting another inconclusive campaign. The initial Roman advance into Senones' territory proceeded with methodical precision, reflecting careful reconnaissance and strategic planning. Roman forces systematically occupied key terrain while establishing fortified bases, supporting extended operations, and preventing Celtic counterattacks against supply lines. The speed achieved through superior logistics and coordinated movement prevented effective Senones mobilization while demonstrating Roman capabilities to potential Celtic allies. Celtic defensive preparations revealed both Senones' military planning sophistication and limitations imposed by strategic situation. Archaeological evidence from hastily constructed fortifications demonstrates desperate efforts, creating defensive positions capable of withstanding Roman assault while providing bases for mobile operations against supply lines. However, scattered defensive works nature and obvious construction under time pressure indicated fundamental Celtic position weakness as Roman forces achieved tactical surprise and strategic initiative. The first major engagement occurred near the Metaurus River, where Senones' warriors attempted halting Roman advance through coordinated attacks on column formations. Celtic tactical planning emphasized traditional strengths in individual combat and psychological warfare, mass charges designed to break Roman formation discipline through sheer ferocity and superior individual fighting skills. But Roman tactical responses demonstrated military reform's effectiveness. Manipular formations maintained cohesion under Celtic assault, while delivering coordinated counterattacks, exploiting gaps in Celtic coordination. The battle unfolded with devastating efficiency, as Roman tactical advantages proved decisive against Celtic fighting methods that hadn't adapted sufficiently to counter evolved Roman capabilities. Celtic long swords, while individually superior weapons, proved less effective against Roman close formation tactics, emphasizing coordinated thrusting attacks with shorter weapons designed for confined combat. Roman shield walls absorbed Celtic assault momentum while creating opportunities for systematic elimination of individual Celtic warriors who found themselves isolated once initial charge lost momentum. The collapse of organized Senones resistance opened coastal territories to systematic Roman occupation. Celtic survivors fled toward remaining strongholds or attempted escaping across Adriatic to potential safety in Illyrian territories. Roman pursuit operations conducted with methodical thoroughness prevented effective Celtic regrouping while capturing substantial prisoner numbers who would face enslavement or execution. The speed and completeness of Roman victory eliminated any possibility of Celtic recovery, while demonstrating to remaining opponents continued resistance, futility. The siege of Sena Gallica represented the final act of organized Senones resistance, as remaining Celtic population concentrated in their principal stronghold for desperate last stand against overwhelming Roman forces. The city's fortifications, strengthened through decades of construction, provided formidable defensive advantages requiring systematic Roman siege operations to overcome. Archaeological evidence from siege layers reveals extensive Roman engineering works, including circumvallation walls, siege mounds, and artillery positions, demonstrating professional competence of Roman military engineering. Celtic defensive efforts revealed both desperate courage and tactical sophistication, as Senones warriors employed every available method, resisting Roman assault operations. Archaeological finds include evidence of countermining operations, sally ports for surprise attacks on Roman siege works, and improvised defensive weapons created from available materials. However, overwhelming Roman advantages in manpower, equipment, and logistics made the outcome inevitable. Despite fierce Celtic resistance prolonging siege for several months, the final assault combined coordinated attacks from multiple directions with systematic destruction of Celtic defensive works through Roman engineering capabilities. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive fire damage and deliberate destruction, indicating Roman determination to eliminate the city as potential future base for Celtic resistance. The thoroughness of destruction, combined with systematic looting following Roman victory, demonstrated Roman intent to make Celtic recovery impossible, while providing tangible rewards for soldiers who'd endured extended campaigning hardships. The aftermath witnessed systematic Roman elimination of Senones' political and military leadership through execution or enslavement that effectively decapitated Celtic resistance capabilities. Roman forces conducted methodical searches for hidden weapons, treasure, and surviving Celtic nobles who might serve as focal points for future resistance movements. These operations' completeness, documented through archaeological evidence of hidden caches never recovered, indicates thoroughness of Roman security measures designed preventing any possibility of Celtic resurgence. The systematic destruction of Senones' power in Italian territories didn't mark complete disappearance of Celtic presence from the peninsula. Scattered communities and individual survivors managed escaping Roman retribution through flight to mountainous regions or assimilation into existing populations. But organized Senones resistance ended. The tribe that had sacked Rome, humiliated the Republic, and ruled Adriatic territories for over a century, ceased to exist as independent political entity. Their name would survive in Roman administrative terminology, Ager Gallicus, Gallic territory, marking lands once controlled by these proud Celtic warriors. But the Senones themselves, as a sovereign people, had been erased from Italy through Roman military might and systematic annihilation. Yet, the story didn't end there. While Italian Senones faced destruction, their kinsmen in the original Gallic homeland along the Seine and Yonne rivers continued to thrive, unaware that their descendants would eventually face the same Roman legions that had destroyed their Italian cousins. The wheel of history turns slowly but inevitably, and Rome never forgot those who had humiliated it. The reckoning for the Gallic Senones would come, but not for another 3 centuries, when a different Roman commander named Julius Caesar would systematically conquer all of Gaul and bring final vengeance for the sack of Rome so many generations before. The Senones communities remaining in ancestral Gallic territories along Seine and Yonne rivers found themselves increasingly caught between expanding Roman power from the south and growing Germanic tribal pressure from the east. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout traditional Senones heartland reveals significant changes in settlement patterns and material culture during 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, reflecting these mounting external pressures. Excavations at Seine's ancient Agedincum show clear stratification layers indicating periods of abandonment and reoccupation, suggesting population instability. Storage pits, previously used for grain preservation, show evidence of hasty filling with personal possessions and valuable objects indicating emergency evacuations. Discovery of weapon hoards buried in rural locations demonstrates systematic conflict preparation, while revealing sophisticated metallurgical capabilities Senones smiths maintained despite political disruption. Material culture recovered demonstrates continuing Celtic artistic traditions while showing increasing influence from both Roman and Germanic sources. Latin metalwork exhibits technical refinements suggesting ongoing craft specialization despite upheaval, with bronze torques and iron weapons displaying characteristic flowing curvilinear designs defining Celtic expression. However, pottery assemblages reveal growing standardization, potentially indicating either increased trade relationships or gradual cultural homogenization under external pressure. Imported Roman amphorae appear with increasing frequency in elite contexts, suggesting diplomatic or commercial relationships, providing access to Mediterranean luxury goods. Political organization underwent significant transformation as traditional tribal structures adapted to new realities. Decentralized authority characterizing earlier Senones society gradually gave way to more centralized leadership capable of coordinating defensive efforts across multiple settlements. Archaeological evidence suggests emergence of fortified central places serving as refuges and administrative centers during crisis periods. Oppida, typically located on defensible hilltops with commanding river valley views, incorporating sophisticated defensive earthworks and timber palisades, requiring coordinated labor from multiple communities. Religious practices intensified as Senones druids sought divine protection against mounting pressures, while maintaining cultural traditions defining tribal identity. Sacred groves and spring sanctuaries show evidence of increased votive activity during this period, with deposits of weapons, jewelry, and precious metals, indicating desperate appeals for divine intervention. Construction of new sacred enclosures featuring circular timber structures surrounded by ritual ditches demonstrates continuing religious infrastructure investment despite military threats and economic disruption. Economic disruption accompanied political fragmentation as traditional trade networks faced increasing interference from both Roman territorial expansion and Germanic tribal movements. Senones had long served as intermediaries, connecting Atlantic coastal regions with Mediterranean markets through river valley routes. Roman control of southern Gaul gradually eliminated direct Mediterranean market access, while Germanic pressure from east threatened established Central European trading partner relationships. Archaeological evidence from trading centers reveals dramatic commercial activity changes during 2nd century BC. Coin hoards show increasing proportions of foreign currency alongside traditional Celtic issues, suggesting established monetary systems disruption and growing reliance on external economic relationships. Military organization evolved, emphasizing defensive capabilities and rapid mobilization rather than offensive operations, characterizing earlier tribal expansion periods. Weapon deposits reveal equipment standardization, suggesting centralized production and distribution systems designed equipping larger warrior numbers with adequate gear, rather than providing elite equipment for individual champions. Prevalence of spears and javelins over expensive longswords indicates tactical adaptation to defensive warfare, while reflecting economic constraints, limiting access to high-quality iron and skilled smiths. Training focused on settlement coordination and rapid threat response, rather than traditional Celtic emphasis on individual warrior prowess and ritualized combat. Archaeological evidence suggests signal system construction using hilltop beacon sites, providing rapid communication across scattered Senones territories. Installations typically featuring stone-lined fire pits, with associated storage areas for fuel and supplies, indicating sophisticated defensive operations planning. Warrior recruitment expanded beyond traditional aristocratic volunteers to include broader population segments as military necessity overcame social restrictions, previously limiting combat participation to elite warriors. Archaeological evidence from weapon graves shows wider military equipment distribution across social classes, while agricultural tools modified for combat use indicates desperate efforts arming civilian populations for defensive operations. The gradual integration of Germanic settlers into traditional Senones territories created complex demographic changes, challenging existing social structures while providing potential military reinforcement against Roman expansion. Archaeological evidence suggests integration occurred through negotiated agreements rather than violent conquest, with Germanic families receiving land grants in exchange for military service and loyalty to Senones leadership. However, long-term implications proved destabilizing as Germanic cultural influences gradually modified traditional Celtic social organization. By the mid-1st century BC, Julius Caesar's systematic conquest of Gaul brought final reckoning for the Senones. Caesar's Gallic campaigns, beginning in 58 BC, represented Rome's most comprehensive military effort to subjugate Celtic peoples and avenge centuries-old humiliations. The Romans remembered. Every schoolboy learned how barbarian Gauls had sacked their city, how Brennus had thrown his sword onto scales, how Rome had paid gold for survival. Now, Rome would exact payment in blood. Caesar's legions, representing the pinnacle of Roman military evolution, possessed overwhelming advantages in organization, equipment, logistics, and tactical flexibility. The manipular system had evolved further into cohort-based legions, capable of sustained operations across vast territories, while maintaining battlefield superiority against any opponent. Roman engineering capabilities enabled construction of massive siege works, fortified camps, and strategic infrastructure projects that Celtic forces simply couldn't match. The Senones, like other Gallic tribes, found themselves facing an enemy that had learned from every previous encounter with Celtic warriors. Roman tactics specifically designed to counter Celtic strengths, disciplined formations absorbing initial charges, systematic use of missile weapons, disrupting Celtic cohesion, engineering capabilities enabling siege warfare that starved out defensive positions. The resistance was brave but ultimately futile. Senones warriors fought with characteristic Celtic courage, launching fierce attacks that temporarily drove back Roman advances. But Roman discipline held. Roman logistics sustained prolonged campaigns, and Roman engineering reduced fortifications one by one. Archaeological evidence from Senones territories conquered during Caesar's campaigns shows systematic destruction of fortifications, large-scale population displacements, and fundamental alterations in settlement patterns, reflecting Roman determination to permanently eliminate Celtic military capabilities. The transformation of defeated Senones populations into subjects of Roman provincial system occurred through complex administrative integration processes. Following military destruction of organized resistance, Roman administrators incorporated Celtic communities possessing sophisticated social structures, legal traditions, and economic systems into standardized provincial governance frameworks. Census records maintained by Roman officials reveal systematic efforts documenting Senones populations, territorial holdings, and economic capabilities as foundations for taxation and military recruitment obligations binding these communities to Roman state. The civitas system, recognizing existing tribal boundaries while subordinating them to Roman authority, provided frameworks for preserving Celtic identity within imperial structures. Roman provincial administration followed established patterns, yet adapted to Celtic social organization and settlement patterns' specific characteristics. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers reveals substantial construction projects, including basilicas, forums, and administrative buildings serving both practical governmental functions and symbolic demonstrations of Roman power. The appointment of Roman magistrates introduced standardized legal procedures and administrative practices, gradually replacing traditional Celtic governance mechanisms. However, Roman administrators recognized existing Celtic institutions' practical value and frequently incorporated tribal leaders into new administrative hierarchies through Roman citizenship grants and appointments to subordinate governmental positions. Legal integration proved particularly complex as Roman jurisprudence encountered Celtic legal traditions differing fundamentally in property rights, personal obligations, and dispute resolution approaches. Celtic law, preserved through oral tradition and administered by Druids, emphasized collective responsibility and restorative justice principles, contrasting sharply with Roman emphasis on individual accountability and punitive measures. Property law underwent particularly significant transformation as Roman individual ownership concepts replaced Celtic systems based on kinship groups and collective territorial rights. The centuriation process, dividing agricultural land into standardized rectangular plots assigned to individual owners, fundamentally altered traditional Celtic settlement patterns while creating new economic development opportunities. Urban planning reflected Roman architectural principles while accommodating existing settlement patterns and local preferences. Transformation of Celtic oppida into Roman-style towns required extensive construction projects, creating employment opportunities while demonstrating Roman engineering capabilities. Archaeological excavations at Sens reveal systematic urban redevelopment, preserving certain Celtic architectural elements while introducing Roman innovations, including hypocaust heating systems, aqueducts, and sewage networks improving living conditions. Religious syncretism between Celtic deities and Roman gods emerged as one of cultural transformation's most significant aspects, as Roman authorities sought accommodating Celtic spiritual traditions while promoting loyalty to Roman religious institutions. Identification of Celtic gods with Roman counterparts provided frameworks for religious continuity, easing political subjugation's psychological impact while creating opportunities for cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence from temple sites reveals extensive Romano-Celtic religious complex construction, combining architectural elements from both traditions while serving mixed populations' spiritual needs. The cult of Mercury Lugus exemplified this synthesis. Roman god Mercury identified with Celtic deity Lugus, who'd served as patron of crafts, commerce, and intellectual pursuits throughout Celtic world. Material culture transformation proceeded gradually as Celtic populations gained access to Roman manufactured goods, while adapting traditional craft techniques to new market demands and aesthetic preferences. Pottery production exemplified cultural synthesis, as Celtic potters learned Roman wheel-throwing techniques and kiln construction while maintaining traditional decorative motifs and vessel forms, serving familiar cultural functions. Metalwork traditions underwent significant evolution as Celtic smiths adapted sophisticated techniques to Roman market demands, while preserving traditional skills in weapon production and decorative metalwork. The quality from Romano-Celtic workshops often exceeded contemporary Roman standards, suggesting Celtic technical expertise found ready markets within broader Roman economy. Language adoption proceeded unevenly, as Latin gradually became the language of administration and formal education, while Celtic languages persisted in domestic and rural contexts. Inscriptional evidence reveals extensive Latin use for official purposes, including legal documents, religious dedications, and commercial transactions, while Celtic personal names and place names continued in common use. Educational opportunities expanded significantly, as literacy in Latin provided access to legal, commercial, and administrative careers unavailable under traditional Celtic organization. The integration of Celtic elites into Roman administrative hierarchies created hybrid social structures, combining elements from both traditions while serving provincial governance practical needs. The transformation of former Senones territories into integral Roman Empire components during 1st and 2nd centuries AD witnessed distinctive Romano-Celtic military tradition emergence as veterans from auxiliary units returned to body homeland communities, carrying decades of experience from imperial campaigns across 3 continents. Archaeological evidence from military discharge diplomas documents systematic recruitment of Celtic youth into specialized auxiliary cohorts, serving alongside regular legions while maintaining distinct tactical capabilities derived from traditional Celtic warfare methods. The cohors Senonum, established during early Augustan period, represented the most prestigious of these Celtic auxiliary units and served with distinction in campaigns throughout empire for over 2 centuries. Military records preserved on bronze tablets reveal this cohort participated in Britain's conquest under Claudius and Trajan's Dacian campaigns, accumulating battle honors rivaling veteran legions. Veterans returning after military service completion brought not only Roman citizenship and financial resources, but extensive knowledge of imperial administrative practices, engineering techniques, and commercial opportunities transforming local communities. The construction activities undertaken by returning veterans demonstrated practical application of engineering skills acquired during military service, as former soldiers supervised major infrastructure projects throughout homeland regions. The medieval chroniclers, who first attempted reconstructing ancient Gaul's history, possessed only fragmentary knowledge of Senones, drawing primarily from classical sources. Surviving Roman administrative records, collapse, and subsequent scholarly traditions, disruption during barbarian invasions. The earliest systematic account appears in Gregory of Tours' Historia, written late 6th century, with Senones receiving brief mention as one of Gallic peoples resisting Roman conquest before eventually submitting to imperial authority. The Renaissance humanist scholars approached Celtic history with unprecedented critical methodology, seeking to distinguish reliable historical evidence from medieval legendary materials accumulated around ancient peoples. The emergence of scientific archaeology during 19th century revolutionized Celtic civilization understanding through systematic excavation techniques, recovering detailed daily life, economic activities, and social organization information. The discovery of Vic's burial in 1953 represented watershed moment in Senones archaeology, revealing extraordinary wealth and international connections of Celtic elites during 6th century BC. The massive bronze crater found in this burial, manufactured in Greek workshops and transported over vast distances to reach final resting place in Celtic grave, demonstrated trade network sophistication, connecting Senones territories to Mediterranean civilizations centuries before Roman conquest. Archaeological investigations at Senones throughout 20th century gradually revealed continuous occupation sequence connecting prehistoric Celtic settlements to Roman administrative centers and medieval urban development. Excavations beneath cathedral revealed substantial Roman building remains constructed over earlier Celtic settlement layers, while systematic survey work in surrounding countryside identified numerous rural sites, preserving evidence of Senones' agricultural practices and settlement patterns. Discovery of Celtic coin molds and metalwork facilities demonstrated Senones' craft production sophistication, while analysis of imported pottery and luxury goods revealed commercial relationships extent with distant regions. The development of scientific dating techniques during mid-20th century enabled archaeologists establishing precise chronologies for Celtic cultural development, clarifying relationships between different Senones history phases. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from settlement sites and burials provided absolute dates correlating with historical events described in classical sources, while dendrochronological analysis of wooden structures revealed detailed construction and occupation sequences, demonstrating Senones communities' stability and prosperity. Modern scholarly debates about Senones chronology have focused particularly on relationships between archaeological evidence for Celtic settlement and historical accounts of tribal migrations, bringing Gallic peoples into Italy during 4th century BC. Some scholars argue archaeological record demonstrates continuous occupation of Senones territories throughout period. Classical sources describe major population movements, suggesting only portions of tribe participated in Italian campaigns, while substantial populations remained in traditional homeland. Contemporary understanding of Celtic civilization has been profoundly influenced by archaeological discoveries revealing pre-Roman European societies' sophistication and complexity. The Senones, as one of most historically visible Celtic peoples, due to dramatic conflicts with Rome, have served as crucial case study for understanding broader patterns of Celtic social organization, economic development, and cultural achievement. Archaeological evidence from Senones territories has demonstrated Celtic societies possessed sophisticated metallurgical techniques, complex trade networks, and advanced agricultural practices, supporting substantial populations and enabling significant cultural achievements. The quality of Celtic craftsmanship revealed through archaeological investigation has challenged earlier scholarly assumptions about pre-Roman European societies' primitive nature, while demonstrating cultural losses accompanying Roman conquest and assimilation. The role of Senones in Roman Gaul conquest has been reassessed through archaeological evidence, revealing Romano-Celtic relationships' complexity during imperial expansion period. Rather than simple military conquest followed by cultural replacement, archaeological record demonstrates gradual cultural synthesis processes, preserving many Celtic traditions within Roman institutional frameworks. Discovery of Romano-Celtic temples, hybrid artistic traditions, and bilingual inscriptions reveals Celtic cultural identity persisted for centuries after political subjugation, adapting to Roman administrative requirements while maintaining distinctive characteristics, reflecting pre-conquest traditions. Modern archaeological techniques continue revealing previously unknown Senones aspects, invisible to classical observers and unavailable to earlier scholars. Environmental archaeology has reconstructed ancient climate conditions and agricultural practices, explaining Celtic prosperity's economic foundations, while scientific analysis of metal artifacts has revealed sophisticated trade networks connecting Celtic territories to distant raw material and finished goods sources. Application of GIS technology to archaeological survey data has enabled systematic settlement pattern and territorial organization analysis, providing new insights into Celtic political structures and social organization. The legacy of Senones in contemporary historical consciousness reflects their dramatic role in ancient history's most memorable events, particularly Rome's sack, demonstrating emerging Roman power's vulnerability to Celtic military capabilities. Their story embodies broader themes of cultural contact, imperial expansion, and complex processes through which diverse peoples were incorporated into expanding Mediterranean civilizations. Archaeological discoveries continue, revealing their sophisticated society's new aspects, challenging simplistic barbarian invasion and cultural replacement narratives, while demonstrating Celtic traditions' resilience and adaptability within changing political circumstances. The Senones thus represent not merely an ancient people whose political independence was eventually extinguished, but a complex society whose cultural contributions were preserved and transformed through centuries of historical development, connecting prehistoric European traditions to medieval and modern European civilization foundations. From the Vic's burial splendor to Brennus's triumph at Rome's gates, from Sena Gallica's maritime prosperity to final defeat by Roman legions, from gradual Romanization creating hybrid Romano-Celtic culture to medieval chroniclers' fragmentary memories, the Senones' journey across a millennium of ancient history demonstrates both human societies' remarkable adaptability, facing fundamental transformation, and cultural traditions' enduring power, transcending political conquest. When we walk through modern Sens, we walk on layers of history, Celtic oppida, where Druids once performed sacred rites, Roman administrative centers, where Latin gradually replaced Celtic tongues, medieval towns, where chroniclers preserved fading memories of ancient glories. Beneath our feet lie the remains of a people who challenged Rome itself, who proved that even the mightiest empires could be humbled by warriors fighting for honor and homeland. The great bronze crater from Vix, now displayed in a museum, still speaks to us across 2,500 years, testament to a sophisticated civilization that flourished long before Caesar's legions marched, that created beauty and wealth and culture deserving remembrance. The Senones may have lost their political independence, may have been absorbed into Rome's vast empire, may have seen their language fade and their gods renamed, but their legacy endures in the archaeological record, in the genetic heritage of modern French populations, in the place names dotting Burgundy's landscape, and in the historical memory of that glorious moment when Brennus stood victorious in Rome and spoke words echoing through eternity, Vae Victis, woe to the conquered. Their story reminds us that history belongs not only to empires that endure, but also to peoples who dared challenge them, who fought bravely even knowing defeat might come, who left marks on human civilization that no conquest could completely erase. From misty Seine Valley origins to Italian adventures, from Rome's sacking to final Romanization, the Senones lived boldly, fought fiercely, and earned their place in history's great narrative. Subscribe to Colossus of Empires to explore more remarkable stories of ancient peoples who shaped our world through courage, ambition, and the eternal human drive to leave something worthy of remembrance for future generations to discover and honor.